Now, if we've paid the legal costs of known apartheid killers, why don't we cover Jacob Zuma's bills? The South African taxpayer has already paid millions for former Defence Minister Magnus Malan, apartheid-era Dr. Wouter Basson, dubbed the name Dr. Death, and former Vlakplaas operative Eugene de Kock. They were charged with apartheid-era atrocities, including giving orders to eliminate, murder or poison opponents of the nationalist government. In 2007, while practicing as a cardiologist, Basson was charged with unprofessional conduct. In 1995, Malan was charged alongside other former senior military officials for the Kwa Makuta massacre. All legal fees paid for by the state. Yet there's opposition to the state paying for Jacob Zuma's legal costs for his fraud and corruption case relating to the arms deal. Joining me is political analyst Sifiso Mahlangu, and in our Durban studio, former State Attorney Krish Govender. Very warm welcome to both of you. Let me start off with you, Krish Govender. Should we be paying Jacob Zuma's legal fees?
It definitely depends on the merits of the case. If, for example, a member of government or anybody in any leadership position in government has responsibilities in terms of the Constitution, and they interpret their powers and their authority in a manner that might be in conflict with the law or the Constitution, it would have to be tested in court. And to that extent, if it's a frivolous or something that is blatantly false, one would be able to criticize it. But if it was based on certain legitimate, we would say, grounds, and where there's also untested law, then a president or a minister, as they may be, would be entitled to say that I believe this is how the law should be applied. And in the nature of our constitutional democracy, these matters are then tested in courts. And a president, while maybe having a special interest in the outcome, is also applying a process that advances the rule of law and separation of powers and so forth, which are all integral parts of our constitutional democracy, and those are the principles that govern us.
And was it correct for Cyril Ramaphosa to give the go-ahead? I mean, this has obviously angered many in the country, and the DA wants to see this matter going to court. Is he the right man to do it?
Well, if a matter is going to be determined by a judge, that would be the correct way to go about it, to wait for the outcome of the court, and the judge would determine and test all these principles in a fair and just manner. Up to that stage, if a person has acted in terms of a representative role that they play in the country, and they are the subject of litigation, I would expect then that they didn't act in a personal capacity, and that must be distinguished. So as long as they were acting as representatives and in a representative role, I would imagine that they would be entitled to ask for that they are legally represented. And if it is found that such claims to legal representation, as I said, are based on irrelevant, frivolous, or absolutely foolish grounds, then the court has, as we all know, and can, in such a case, order that such a person be held personally responsible for such legal costs.
Okay. Sifiso Mahlangu, what do you make of the conversation that's happening around whether we should or shouldn't pay for Jacob Zuma?
Well, good evening to you. It's very strange that South Africa suddenly had a moment of realization to discuss whether they should pay for former President Jacob Zuma's legal fees when they paid for Magnus Malan, whom I might add at this point is an alleged pedophile. You know, to sadness, he can't come and answer to those allegations and claims. But former president, apartheid president. F.W. de Klerk is sitting cozily in his house somewhere in the Western Cape, and he receives his pension. And he still has the sort of protocol, the vehicles that are assembled to a former president. He still has the same status as a former president. And it was that way with former President Mandela. It still is that way with former President Thabo Mbeki. Why shouldn't it be done with former President Jacob Zuma? I think South Africans have a problem in the realization of who the body of the opposition is.
So do you think it's regardless of what they've done, because they've been in this position, they have the same access, the same legal recourse?
We must look at the case, and the case is plausible in the matter of the state versus Jacob Zuma so far as the arms deal case. The arms deal case, when it happened, when this arms procurement project was administered to South Africa, Jacob Zuma was not even the president. Thabo Mbeki was the president at the time. And I witnessed an interview where the former president, Thabo Mbeki, said there was no arms deal. So if there's no arms deal, surely Thabo Mbeki must be subpoenaed to the Pietermaritzburg High Court to answer on why there was no arms deal. Patricia de Lille, who was at the time considered the whistleblower, must come and testify on what the proof is. I don't see how an MEC of economic development in KZN, and that was the position Jacob Zuma held at the time, could procure arms. The defense minister in Mbeki's administration, former President Thabo Mbeki, must come and answer for that. So I don't think he should be paying for the arms deal in his own pocket. I mean, he wasn't going to use those arms in his personal capacity. If there was an arms deal, surely the former presidents altogether, the defense ministers, and I believe cabinet at the time should come and speak for itself.
We've got a caller on the line from Cape Town. Cheryl, go ahead. Hello, Cheryl. I believe you've got something to say. Okay. Well, we'll try and get her back again. You were talking about treating Jacob Zuma like, you know, former leaders. I mean, if you look at the legal fees here, former Defence Minister Magnus Malan, the cost per day for his trial was 1.8 million. Apartheid-era Dr. Wouter Basson was the disciplinary legal cost of 15 million rand. Former President Jacob Zuma estimated legal costs of 16 million rand to date. I mean, how do you sort of justify those sort of fees when it comes to people like us? Because it's, for a lot of people who've been affected, it's repugnant to know that you're paying for these men.
I mean, South Africans should have a nuanced conversation about what cabinet ministers, presidents and former presidents really deserve. And I don't want to be anybody's attorney, but I think South Africans should treat and paint everyone with the same brush if they held the same positions, accountably so. If we dislike ministers flying business class, it shouldn't be one minister who gets a better taste of the other. It should be a policy recommendation, and it should be put to the test, as in all ministers. Someone like me, I don't understand why they need often the blue lights, because government is very slow when you go to Home Affairs, but the minister has a very fast blue lights on the N1, and that's all where government is fast at the moving cars. But the challenge is, at the end of the day, that's what they're entitled to. Okay. Now, we can't just change the rules just because it's concerning Jacob Zuma. I think there must be systematic politics. We
got Cheryl back from Cape Town. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Hi. I don't think that we should be paying Jacob Zuma's legal cost. After all, he has brought the company down to where we are now, and he has stolen more than enough money, so he should cover his own costs.
All right, thank you for that. Cheryl, Krish, you said that you've got to try and work out what gets heard in court or not. Can you hear me, Krish?
Yes. Let me clarify something.
Okay.
I gave you a general outline of what obtains under our constitutional democracy. But there are two polarized aspects that emerge from your discussion with Sifiso just now. The first aspect was also part of what you said in your introduction, the references to Magnus Malan, Eugene de Kock, and Wouter Basson. Now, I want to be very clear about that. Those persons were agents of apartheid. They were an extension of white minority rule. They were the agents of violence and disruption and every conceivable wrongdoing that one would be able to identify in terms of our present Constitution and Bill of Rights. And clearly, in those circumstances, they ought not to have ever received state assistance in respect of their legal costs. These were acts against the state, against the people of this country. Those are crimes against humanity if you have to pitch it at that level. Unfortunately, post-94 and until almost 1999, there was a period when our systems were still being revitalized and transformed, and in that process we were also caught up with the so-called fear issues of what the right wing may be up to. Also wrapped with it was reconciliation and our romance with justice and wanting to hear that and see people get a fair trial for crimes against humanity. Now that was a farcical period that we went through, and the beneficiaries of that were these agents of apartheid. Sadly, if they ever had to think that they would get legal assistance in this day and age, well, nobody would ever believe such a thing would happen. And I would like to just dismiss that as one of the aberrations of our transformation into our new democracy, where apartheid agents were the beneficiaries of that period. But let's come to where we are now. The issue of Jacob Zuma being a beneficiary in respect of legal costs arising out of a case involving the arms deal. Now that is a slightly specific case that needs to be analyzed on its own merits. And Sifiso has a point. When Jacob Zuma was an MEC at that time and was involved in a certain relationship with a businessman by the name of Shabir Sheikh, whom we all know about. Now, that sort of case, in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, in terms of our constitutional democracy and so on, would have been a case that Mr. Zuma would have had to pay his own legal costs. Because the policies that began to take shape post-1999 through state institutions and so on were gradually developed. And at that point, I think Mr. Zuma was able to probably, because of his position as an MEC and so forth, assert certain rights to legal representation. However, who paid for it and how it was paid is something that one would have to find out. All I know was that Mr. Zuma was not involved in that case involving Shabir Sheikh. He had a watching brief which was paid for by the state. Now, there's a difference there because there are allegations being made against a businessman in private practice, and you had somebody who was in government. And when you are in that situation, I can safely say that it would be seen to be fair and reasonable that a watching brief in the interests of the state, not necessarily in the interests of Jacob Zuma, was necessary for the purposes of ensuring that should something arise out of that case, that there would be an opportunity for the state and or Mr. Zuma in an official government capacity to be ready and be prepared to deal with that matter should it arise.
I'm going to have to jump in here because we've got a caller on the line from KZN, Solomon. He says why Zuma should be treated differently from apartheid leaders. Go ahead, Solomon.
Yes, good evening. Good evening to you, Jane, and good evening to your guests there. I think there is a very thin line here which will be able to separate between official position which comes with certain responsibilities which might land one incumbent into legal battles, as it is happening with the former President Zuma, and on matters as referred by the former prosecutor, which could be regarded as frivolous. So it won't be easy for us to be able to draw that line unless we go back to the policies, because I do not think that South Africa was prepared to make that difference, to say cases where they are brought, or rather are faced by incumbents on the basis of them taking ill-informed decisions, should be dealt in this similar way. But one would want as well to go back to history. Former apartheid political incumbents who have been represented by state funds and so on and so on.
Okay, let me pick up your point, Solomon. Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to that? I mean, how do you draw the line then? What's the sort of fallout on South Africans from these decisions that are made?
The relationship one speaks about is the relationship between the electorate and the polls. Every 5 years, South Africa goes through an election, and people need to vote very carefully because it's a 5-year marriage. And after that marriage, the president is then the incumbent, is then the president, and that president has sort of the rulership, for lack of a better word. He's the head of government, the head of cabinet for that term, unless something very dramatic happens. Now, that relationship makes him the beneficiary of certain advantages of the government scope, issues of funding, protocol, protection, and that sort of thing. Until that relationship is over, then you can't just pick and choose. It is a 5-year contract. And unfortunately, when you do elect someone, with defaults or not, they receive a certain bench that they receive from the country. And that bench, often, being a president, lasts forever. But I think the interesting thing I really want to pick up here is the ANC's leaning to the right, and the ANC losing grip and losing power with the branches of the ANC, often then sends its president out to be eaten by dogs. This is not the last time South Africa has an inquiry, sadly enough. There's going to be inquiries after inquiry. That's the nature of developing governments. Some things should be done with it, because these inquiries are expensive to a developing country and all of that. But Mr. Ramaphosa, the current president, is also going to face some legal battles. The ANC must be very considerate if the line they are drawing is going to be something that is persistent in presidents to come. I don't know if this would have been the case in the days of Luthuli, of Makhato, of Mahabane, the previous presidents of the ANC.
Okay, let's leave it on that question you posed there. We've got another caller, Wendy from Cape Town. Go ahead, Wendy.
You know, the problem about South Africans, we have double standards. It's okay for other people to be covered, and it's okay for other people to be found guilty even before the trial is even finished. And I'm hoping that South Africans, we are learning that sometimes to observe and just to watch what is going on helps. Because now you find that people who are pointing fingers and are also now turning out to be implicated. It's a sad story, but at the same time we must rejoice that the truth is coming out at the end. So
yes, I guess at whatever cost. Thanks for that, Wendy. Krish, do you want to answer that very briefly?
Yes, I think Wendy touched on a good point. The truth will out at the end, and in that way, our legal costs and legal system emerges stronger in that we're investing in something that is in the search for the truth. There's just one final point I want to make, is that we do have a fallback situation where if a person has been given legal assistance and legal costs, and if it's found subsequently that these were absolutely based on very poor reasoning, and the person who sought it ought not to have been given the legal costs because they were, their hands were very deeply, we'll call it, soiled. There are ways in which that can be recovered from that person afterwards, if there is no law, if there is no court order, to that effect. And my view is that all legal officials representing the state must be aware of this, and they should be able to also protect themselves to, if it's possible, to ask for a ruling from the judge on the question of who should pay the legal costs. It's happening nowadays, and I think it's something that we should be encouraging and hope that it takes root. Thank you.
That makes sense. Krish Govender, Sifiso Mahlangu, thank you very much. Up next, is this the end for estate agents?